October 8, 1918. Lieutenant Paul Woolmer raised his Luger and fired. The American in front of him kept moving, still alive. Woolmer had no explanation for that. What came next made even less sense. The American reached for the pistol at his hip. Blocky, no craftsmanship worth noticing. It carried no mark of rank, no elegance, nothing resembling a statement. It looked like a tool built to end a dispute and nothing more. How does a German officer with a loaded sidearm end up surrendering to a man who just drew his weapon? Because Woolmer's Luger was built for one kind of war. The M1911 was built for what that war had already become. 20 minutes earlier, 6 German soldiers surged down the slope in a bayonet charge, fast, disciplined, closing hard. York's rifle was empty, no time to reload. His hand went to the M1911 at his hip. The men ran in a column. York shot from the back forward. Last man first, front man last. He had learned it in Tennessee, shooting wild turkeys. Take the tail of the flock first. The birds at the front don't scatter if they don't hear the ones behind them fall. The M1911 did not sound like the Luger. The Luger cracked, sharp, metallic, a mechanism completing its cycle. The .45 ACP hit differently, dull, heavy, not the sound of precision, the sound of conclusion. By the time Corporal Alvin York of the 328th Infantry Regiment called for surrender, 132 German soldiers had laid down their arms. By 1918, 4 years of attrition had stripped most German infantry companies to fewer than 100 men. York had just taken more than a full company, 1 man, 1 pistol. Woolmer stood inside that number. The Luger P-08 translated German military doctrine into steel. Toggle link action, watchmaker tolerances, a grip angle so naturally aligned the pistol almost aimed itself. German officers carried it as a declaration of technical mastery, of what kind of institutions stood behind them. Precision as identity, engineering as rank. The M1911 made no such declaration. Woolmer's Luger fired. It missed 4 bullets, point-blank range. The man didn't stop. The pistol that ended Woolmer and the Argonne didn't come from an engineer's imagination. It came from a reckoning, 14 years earlier on the other side of the world. The American Army was paying for a different answer to the same question, and the currency was bodies in the Philippines. The Moro warriors fought in a state of religious conviction that the .38 Long Colt couldn't reach. Not metaphorically, literally. 4 rounds into a man at close range, and he kept moving. One documented case, a prisoner, 4 shots to the body, still closing the distance, stopped only when a soldier drove a rifle butt into his skull. This was not a single incident. It was a pattern running through the whole of the Moro campaigns. The Army pulled the old .45 Colt revolvers out of storage. The attacks stopped. Not a theory, a documented result with a body count behind it. Between 1899 and 1902, the Philippine conflict consumed more than 4,000 American soldiers. Part of that number paid with their lives for the wrong caliber. In 1904, Colonel John T. Thompson, later the name behind a submachine gun, and Major Louis Lagarde of the Army Medical Corps received a formal assignment. The location, the Nelson Morris Stockyards in Chicago. The materials, live cattle, human cadavers, 10 calibers of ammunition. Thompson and Lagarde worked with the precision of men who understood what the data would be used for. Military identification tags on each cadaver. Notebooks open. The carcasses hung from the beams of the meatpacking hall. A round from the .38 Long Colt struck. The tag swayed, the tissue registered, the entry in the notebook remained brief. A round from the .45 struck. The exit wound told a different story, and the protocol form recorded a different entry. U.S. Army letterhead on the paperwork. An industrial drain running below the table. Administrative precision inside industrial violence. 10 calibers tested. 1 conclusion. Nothing below .45 caliber produced the shock effect that a military sidearm required when the distance closed to nothing. Thompson and Lagarde translated 3 years of combat deaths into a single paragraph of doctrine. The board's final language became the Army's standing order. The only safeguard at close encounters is a well-directed rapid fire from nothing less than a .45 caliber weapon. That doctrine left one number on the table: 45 caliber, minimum. The requirement landed on John Moses Browning's desk. What does a designer do with that? Browning didn't start with a pistol. He started with a cartridge. 230 grains, 850 feet per second. Not fast, not elegant. Heavy, wide, and built to stop a body that had already decided not to stop. The cartridge answered the question first. The pistol came second. Every design decision derived from what that round demanded: grip angle, weight, the 7-round magazine, enough to be decisive, not enough to invite hesitation. Browning wasn't designing a service weapon. He was answering a requirement written in combat deaths. In 1911, the Army ran the formal trial. 2 candidates, 6,000 rounds each. The Savage pistol stopped 37 times. Browning's design stopped 0 stoppages across 6,000 rounds, the equivalent of 11 to 14 hours of sustained fire at combat rate. The Savage was built for controlled conditions. Browning's pistol was built for the moment when controlled conditions no longer exist. On March 29, 1911, the United States Army signed the adoption order. The pistol became the model of 1911. The Americans had their answer. The Germans had been building theirs for years, around an entirely different question. In 1911, the United States Army fielded the most powerful standard-issue military pistol in the world. That same year, the German officer corps kept refining a doctrine built on the exact opposite logic. Officers direct combat. They don't fight it. That distinction determined everything about the sidearm. A pistol, in this framework, served no meaningful operational role. It was a tool of last resort, for enemies who surrendered too slowly, for circumstances no field manual named directly. It needed to be light, concealable, manageable with one hand, precise at close range, nothing beyond that. The Walther PP entered German service in 1929. Double action, chambered in .32 ACP. Its compact variant, the PPK, followed 2 years later. The PPK fit inside an officer's jacket without disturbing the line of the uniform. Not the silhouette of someone armed, but the silhouette of someone in command. Compactness was not a compromise, it was the point. The SS carried them, so did the Gestapo. The Wehrmacht Officer Corps carried the Mauser HSC, the Sauer 38H, Browning M1922 pistols taken from occupied Belgium. Compact automatics built around the same philosophy. By 1940, the Walther P38 became the standard service pistol. But in officers' pockets, the smaller weapons stayed. The role hadn't changed. The assumption beneath it hadn't changed either. That assumption held one specific limit: the moment that demanded one shot to stop a man. That was the moment the system had already failed. German doctrine held that no officer would ever reach it. The .32 ACP fired a 71-grain bullet. The .45 ACP fired 230. German officer doctrine rested on one assumption: the pistol would almost never enter the fight. On the 8th of October 1918, Lieutenant Paul Woolmer tested that assumption in the Argonne Forest. Corporal Alvin York and 16 men from the 328th Infantry had worked their way behind a German position. Machine guns opened up. Several Americans went down. York moved through the machine gun crews from cover. Careful, methodical. A Tennessee marksman raised in the Cumberland Hills. Picking targets through dense terrain was not new to him. Then Woolmer ordered a bayonet charge. Men came down the slope, 6, maybe 10, close range, fast. What does a man do when there's no time to work a bolt? He reaches for his sidearm, if that sidearm was built for exactly this moment. York set down the rifle. His hand went to the M1911. Not panic, a decision. He later described the principle he applied as the same one from turkey hunting back in Tennessee. Shoot the last man first. The men in front won't see the ones behind fall. They keep running. You keep working. He started from the back of the line and moved forward. The 45 shots on that hillside didn't sound like rifle fire. They were heavier, flatter. The soldiers still running hadn't heard anything wrong yet. Then they were the ones going down. The silence between shots was where the counting happened. The M1911 held 7 rounds. York described the charge as 6 to 10 men. There was no spare magazine for this maneuver. Every shot had to finish what it started. The pistol had been designed for exactly that condition. 1 hit, 1 stop. No margin for a second attempt. York wrote about it afterward in his diary. He said he shot those men like wild turkeys. The calm in that phrasing wasn't something he performed. It was the whole point. A man who had always hunted, using the right tool in the exact situation the tool was built for. The M1911 didn't make York capable of this. It made sure his capability had somewhere to go. He walked up to Woolmer and accepted the surrender of 132 German soldiers. In the years after the war, German accounts questioned the scale of it. Some argued it was impossible. 1 man, a pistol, those numbers. The basic record held. But the reluctance to accept it is its own kind of evidence. What York did with 7 rounds was easier to disbelieve than to explain. Woolmer's Luger had fired once. The PPK was James Bond's pistol, not by accident. Elegant, compact, disappears inside a jacket, fits the palm, projects authority without announcing itself. Walther built it in 1931 for plainclothes German police. Concealment as the primary specification, not stopping power. It looked right, it worked in the wrong scenario. A German officer unsnapped his holster flap. The PPK came into his hand. Small, precise, contained entirely within his palm. Across from him, the M1911 didn't disappear into anything. It occupied space. 2 pistols placed side by side make the argument without words. One built to be invisible, one built to be final. The physics underneath that contrast is not complicated. A .32 ACP round carries a bullet between 71 and 73 grains, driven somewhere between 900 and 1,000 feet per second, depending on barrel length and load. It will kill a man, in time. Against a man moving toward you with intent, time is the one thing the engagement doesn't offer. The .45 ACP carries 230 grains at 850 feet per second. The mass ratio between those 2 rounds approaches 3 to 1, less a comparison between 2 bullets than between a tennis ball and a hockey puck. Both can cause damage. Only one stops the problem immediately. German officers carried the Walther PPK, the Mauser HSC, Browning M1922s acquired from occupied Belgium, the Sauer 38H, all compact, all chambered in .32 ACP or 380 ACP. The men directing the most technically sophisticated army in Europe held sidearms the M1911 outweighed by nearly 3 to 1 in bullet mass. Woolmer's Luger had fired. It hadn't found a target. That miss isn't an anecdote. It has an exact numerical expression. 159 grains of bullet mass separating a pistol that might stop a man from one that would. Not eventually. Now. The M1911 wasn't designed for concealment. Too heavy for a jacket pocket, too large for a dress uniform, too loud in every sense to project quiet authority. Soldiers who weren't issued one found ways to acquire it through whatever means were available. Because anyone who had watched it work once understood the difference between a weapon that could cause a problem and a weapon that ended the conversation. The preference wasn't sentimental, it was empirical. By the end of World War II, 1.9 million M1911s had been manufactured. What separates a pistol built for a parade uniform from one built for a trench raid? 1.9 million M1911s answered that question, not with theory, with production. A German officer, alone in a dugout. Outside, footsteps in mud, heavy, uneven. Then silence at the door, then movement. He had seconds, not minutes, seconds. The PPK was at his hip, compact, chambered in .32 ACP, designed to sit beneath the flap of a dress uniform without breaking its line. It looked like the right weapon. It was not built for this. Trench raids were not exceptional. Both sides ran them on the Western Front from 1915 through 1918, practically every night across every sector. British and French archives document more than 3,000 raids in 1917 alone. Small teams, total darkness, a dugout entrance no wider than 1 man, no engagement distance, only contact. The PPK worked in occupied Paris, arrests in corridors, control over unarmed civilians. For that function, it was precise and sufficient. The man coming through the dugout entrance was not an unarmed civilian. German procurement had optimized the officer's sidearm for the wrong fight. Not by accident, by doctrine. The dugout at 3 in the morning was not in the doctrine, it was in the war. The footsteps stopped outside the door. The doorway went dark. The German officer reached for the PPK. On the other side of that bunker door, American industry had already crossed 1.9 million M1911s. In that war alone, 5 companies produced it simultaneously: Remington Rand, Colt, Ithaca, Union Switch and Signal, and Singer. Singer had manufactured sewing machines since 1851. Its factories converted to pistol production in weeks. What had stitched fabric now pressed steel frames and fitted slides. The production philosophy matched the weapon's own, not refinement, volume. German officers carried Lugers home in duffel bags after the war. Precise mechanisms. Beautiful. The Luger traveled as a trophy, the mechanical signature of a military tradition worth collecting. American soldiers responded differently. They hid the M1911 from requisition orders. Not as a souvenir, as something that worked. The M1911's reputation wasn't built on Sergeant York. It accumulated across 2 wars and hundreds of thousands of separate engagements, from the Meuse Argonne to the Pacific. Each time a soldier chose not to hand it back when the paperwork said he had to. 1.9 million units in a single conflict. 74 years before the Army formally replaced it. Not one of those nearly 2 million M1911s ended up behind glass with a tag. The Army used them. 74 years of continuous service before the official replacement, the Beretta M9 9mm, adopted in 1985. MARSOC didn't comply. Why did 21st century special operations units keep choosing a pistol adopted in 1911? Not tradition. The Thompson Board had written its conclusion in 1904. A military pistol must stop a close-range threat immediately. 45 ACP still delivered. 9mm, by the metrics that mattered in a doorway, did not. Operators carried custom 1911 pattern pistols into Afghanistan. The grip angle unchanged. The caliber unchanged. The result documented across 2 world wars, still valid in a Kandahar compound. 2 objects, same era, different ends. In a European museum, a Luger rests behind glass. Serial number, provenance, collector's note attached. One of the most refined military pistols ever built. Now, a trophy. In Afghanistan, an operator draws a custom 1911 from a holster. Same frame as 1911, same principles, still a weapon. The Meuse Argonne built the reputation. 2 major conflicts confirmed it. Every military pistol developed after 1911 faced the same standard. Stopping power, reliability, the ability to end a threat at close range before the threat ended you. The 1911 passed that test repeatedly. The Luger passed it on paper. The Army transitioned. MARSOC kept the 45. The Luger went into the cases. After 1945, the Luger became a museum piece. Not because the steel failed, not because the mechanism wore out, because Germany never asked the question that the Philippines forced on America in 1899. A German officer in the Argonne raised his Luger. It wasn't enough. That wasn't combat chance. That was 2 doctrines meeting at close range. Germany built the Luger around an officer's role: command, delegate, control. The pistol was a last resort. Concealment over stopping power. Refinement over mass. America built the M1911 around what had already happened: the Philippines, 1899 to 1902. 4,000 Americans dead. Moro fighters absorbed 6 rounds of .38 Long Colt and kept moving. The caliber failed. The doctrine failed. The men died. The answer wasn't philosophical, it was physical. A heavier bullet, more mass on target. No compromise on the one variable that had already cost 4,000 lives. When those two answers met in the Argonne Forest in 1918, one side carried a prediction. The other carried a lesson drawn in blood. The prediction was precise and elegant. The lesson was neither. Germany designed for the war it expected. America designed for the war it had already bled through. One answer was theoretical. The other was evidence. The Thompson-Lagarde tests of 1904 drew directly from the Philippine experience and fixed .45 caliber as the American standard. 14 years later, the Argonne confirmed it.